Hello and welcome to another episode of the We Have a Meeting podcast. So today we're joined by an incredible guest and I'm very, very excited for this conversation. An ex-police officer, teacher, author and instructor for the Black Swan Group, she's skilled in hostage negotiation, crisis management and intelligence analysis. So today we are in very safe hands. Please welcome to the podcast, Sandy Hein. How are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here.
It's amazing to have you here. Obviously, we're a big fan of Chris Voss and the Black Swan Group and all of the different techniques that they promote and the methodology. And we cite them a lot in our sales training and our sales calls and things like that. So we'll get into that, I'm sure, a little bit later. But we'll start the way we always start our podcast, Sandy. So the first question is, who are you and what problem do you solve?
Who am I? Wow, you have to start me with a hard one like that. That's
the big one.
The big one. I am a woman who has challenged traditionally male roles, starting as a police officer. And I forgot the second question. It's early where I'm at, so.
It's okay. We can repeat. I've got them written down. So currently in your role at the moment, in terms of what you do with Black Swan, what problems do you typically solve?
Well, it's funny you say that because we are a negotiations company and typically we help people make better deals and we teach them how to influence in a positive way. For me, and I don't know if it's because I'm the female instructor in the group, a lot of times I tend to get coaching clients or people in classes that ask me questions like, how do you talk your kid into eating breakfast? So for me, it's not just about the business aspect of it. It's basically teaching people a new way to communicate because that's essentially what we're doing.
Okay, so it's negotiation across the board, and it's one of those when I read Never Split the Difference. Negotiation is every part of life. Some people think it's just if you're an FBI negotiator or if you're in sales, but actually no, you're negotiating with your partner that you want to have a Chinese rather than an Indian on a Friday night. So it's a great skill to have. So I guess the people that come to you, the people that you sit down with, you mentioned then some people might be having problems with children in terms of negotiating. What kind of, if we were saying like you're a doctor's surgery and you're fixing these problems, what kind of symptoms do they typically have?
A lot of people have problems communicating with their children because they interrogate them. Just like everybody in the world, kids don't like to be asked questions. They're finding their own space in the world. They feel like if you're asking them questions, they're losing that space. So and typically between the ages of 12 and 18, I'm not going to lie. Younger than that, these skills are great to practice on. But between 12 and 18, they can be life or death. Talk about high stakes communication. So people will typically yell at their kids for doing something wrong and correct the behavior or think that they're correcting the behavior. And then the very next day, that same kid comes back and does it again. And they can't figure out why. And so my advice is stop yelling, or if you have to yell, because I'm a parent, so I realize this, you're going to yell. It's just going to happen because you get keyed up, and especially if they're doing something that worries you or scares you, you're going to yell. The problem is then when you correct the behavior right after you yell at them, because when you get assertive, and yelling is assertive, or even when you come at them a little hard, you send them to their amygdala. You put them in survival mode. And when you send them to their amygdala, you're cutting off that prefrontal cortex where all the thinking happens. So anything you say after they go to their amygdala and they're in that, freeze, flight, fight mode, they're not going to pick it up. Meaning the next day they're going to come back and make the same mistake. It's going to get you more frustrated. And it's just going to become this vicious cycle. Well, you get mad because you keep correcting and they keep doing it again, but they're not catching the correction because you've sent them to survival mode by yelling at them or getting assertive with them. So it's just yell if you have to. I mean, they're kids, right? Something's going to happen. You're going to yell at your kid. It's typical. So, and parents think, well, I can't ever yell at my child. I said, well, in a perfect world, but this is not a perfect world. So when you yell, take a time out you know, send them to their room for a few minutes. Take a few minutes yourself to calm down, then have a conversation about what just happened, and then talk about why that behavior is not acceptable, or maybe what they should be trying instead, because then their prefrontal cortex will be back online and they can hear you.
Yeah, totally. So because I remember reading, obviously, Never Split the Difference, and there was so much in that where it was like, oh, why haven't I been thinking this way? Like, this all makes sense to me. It was just like someone just turned on the lights, and I was like, why have I been sat in the dark for so long? So I guess when you're training these people, how long is it for? Because it's on a one-on-one or like it to a group, so it's going to be a quicker impact, I guess, than just reading and self-learning. How quickly does the penny drop for these people where they go, oh, it makes sense now, I realise I've been doing it all wrong?
I think it makes sense to people fairly quickly. The problem is them going out and using it without fear, because some of the things we tell people to do, they make them feel awkward. And so, when you feel awkward, you tend to avoid. So some of the skills are a little bit harder for them to kind of adopt into their daily communication style because of that. Once they use the skills a few times and they realize the magic that happens when they use the skills, then they get more confident with it. Then they go out and they try it. And I will say from experience, and I believe that most of the instructors will agree with me, females tend to use these skills with less fear. They'll throw it out there and just let it land and see what happens. I think men as a whole will use it once they know it works. They're a little more skeptical, and they don't use it they don't use it by throwing caution to the wind. They use it after they contemplate it for a little while, and they think about it for a little while, and they realize whatever they do is not going to come back on them. That's more the way men use it. Women, you say, hey, go out and try this label, and they say, okay, and they go do it. It's just,
Yeah.
It's crazy how that works, but I think it's because women have had to use emotional intelligence since the dawn of time, because we were the weaker sex. The men went out and hunted, the women stayed home and took care of things, and they had to use that emotional intelligence to get what they wanted or to get what they needed out of life, because they couldn't physically take it. And so I think for using tactical empathy, women are kind of at an advantage, because we've been kind of programmed through the years that we are the weaker sex. And that's just changing. If you think about, the age of time, essentially, that's just changing. That there are much physically stronger women now, much more, that sounded ridiculous. There are much more physically strong women in the world now than there was before. And, women are finding their way, but there are still instances, in the boardroom, in interviews, where they go in fighting preconceived notions about how they're supposed to be.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. It's really interesting, and I think it's something that I'll have to keep a keener eye on, because when we do our sales training and we're teaching them all these different techniques, and a lot comes from kind of Never Split the Difference and things like that. So when we're saying that, you are right, it's a case of like, a lot of people will be like, I don't believe that's going to work. Like when we're doing like no-orientated questions and things like that, and then when they see it work on a call, they're like, oh. And I actually think the first time that I heard my business partner, Zach, do one of these, I was like, I think it's just your personality. And he was just like, no, it's not, just trust me with it. And but we'll get into all of that. So I want to just go back, Sandy, because we're big fans of the Black Swan Group. So how did you get involved?
I've been working off and on with them since 2011. Derek Gaunt, who is also one of the instructort, was my team commander when I was a hostage negotiator at the police department. So, wow. We've known each other for 30 years. He didn't come onto the police department too far ahead of me, and we went up into the investigations division together. And so our career kind of paralleled until I decided I didn't want to be promoted, and he decided he did. that's when we went our separate ways. But being on the negotiations team together, I think actually kind of bonded us a little bit. You outside the police department, people don't really understand that, but as a police officer, you're in a different culture. We're a very tight family. We don't have to like everybody in our family. No one likes everybody in their, or is it just me?
Yeah.
So am I completely dysfunctional? But, you don't always like everyone in your family, but, you're always there for them. And that's kind of that's the relationship that Derek and I have had. And so when he started working with Chris, I can't even remember when he started working with Chris. I want to say 2009 or 2010. They'd been friends before that, though. I think they'd met before that. And my introduction to the Black Swan Group was, hey, Sandy, I've been wanting to bring you onto this group. I think you'd be really good. I think I think it's right up your alley. And, of course, he's telling me all these, almost auditing me, right? Accusations, audits. And I'm going, oh, okay, what do you want? But he said, we do this training in Germany. And Chris was going, and then he couldn't go one time, so he asked me to go, and now I can't go, and I'm asking you to go. And I said, what does this involve? And I mean, I'm in the world of law enforcement still at this point, so the business world is scary to me. You people think carrying a gun and wearing a vest is scary. The corporate world is terrifying. So I said, what do I have to do? And he said, you just teach these skills you already know. And I said, well, it can't be too hard, right? All right. Because once again, women, they'll jump in the deep end and hope for the best, So it's like, all right, I'm in. What do I need to do? So he brought me this.
See what happens.
Exactly. Throw me in. I'm gonna sink or I'm gonna swim, one or the other, right? Hopefully I'll swim. So they brought me this big notebook, and he said, here's what you have to teach. And I said, holy crap. I'm like, this is like 2 weeks away. How am I going to learn all this stuff? He said, you know it. You know it. Intuitively, you know it. And I said, but, and then he tells me, well, you're teaching at the University of Frankfurt, and the people hosting you, are German, but the people in the class are Chinese. And I'm like, how does this even, translating back and forth, something that would take 20 minutes to teach here takes an hour and a half by the time you do all the translation. So it was a bizarre, interesting experience. Probably still in my life, one of the most bizarre experiences I've ever dealt with. But I stayed up, it's an overnight flight for us to get over there. So I stayed up on the plane trying to cram, it felt like I was back in college, trying to cram all this information in my brain and make sure I understood what I was talking about before I went in there. So it was stressful, but it was fun. And there's a big joke that's come out of this because Chris was the first one to go over. Then Derek went over, and they fell in love with Derek. So Derek kept going. Then Derek couldn't go, so I went over. Well, the graduates have this big party at the end of the week, and we're usually there the last 2 days. And so they have this big dinner. And it's at this traditional Chinese restaurant. And so the food is very authentic, and they bring this alcohol that I can never remember the name of, but it's got to be 120 proof. I mean, it's ridiculously strong. And so Derek warned me before I went over, keep your glass in your hand because they're going to keep filling it with this liquor and you're going to get drunk really fast. And ask the waiter for a bottle of water because you need to keep hydrated because they're going to keep giving you this. And I said, holy cow. So I went over there and I did the whole thing. I came back. The first time Chris and Derek and I were in the same room together and we were talking about this, he said, you guys got invited to the dinner? And we said, yeah, didn't you get invited to the dinner? And he said, I did not get invited for the dinner. So it's this big joke of they liked us better. And so he's still pretty sore about it. He brings it up every now and then about how he didn't get invited to the dinner. But Derek and I both got invited to the dinner. So it's like a little inside Black Swan joke now about his lack of socializing with the client. But that was my first exposure. And then I did a few things for them. I retired from the police department, and I was going to Georgetown and doing their class with them for a long time. And doing different research projects and stuff for Chris kind of to keep myself busy. I don't handle idle time very well. I like to be busy. So, they were still trying to get off their feet really as a group, as a company. They were trying to still get off their feet. So or get on their feet, I should say. and they didn't have enough work to keep me busy. So I went to the local high school and I taught criminal justice for 6 years. And about my fourth year in, Derek was calling me saying, "You ready to come yet? We're getting busy now. We need you. You ready to come yet?" And by that time, I had fallen in love with the kids I was teaching and I was enjoying it. My daughter was in college. This job was paying for her college. I said, "Call me in 2020. She graduates in 2020. I'll be done paying for her college. Then I can consider moving over." So by the end of 2018, Derek would call me every couple of months and say, "You're still coming in 2020, right? You're still coming? We want you to come." I was like, okay. So, they called me December of 2019 and said, "All right, we're ready for you. Let's go." And I said, okay. I felt kind of guilty about it because I was leaving some of my students in between level 1 and level 2 of criminal justice. And I felt kind of guilty about that. And then COVID hit. And I thought, I don't want to teach in this mess anyway, right? So I said, I'm in. And so then as soon as COVID hit, I just started working with them right away. And I've been with them full time ever since. And it's I'd say the third time's a charm. This is essentially my third career, right? I was a police officer. I was a teacher. Now I'm teaching negotiations. Third time is a charm. And it is the most amazing job. And people probably think for different reasons, but the reason this job is so amazing to me is because I see how the techniques I'm teaching people literally are changing their lives. And there's nothing better than working with a coaching client and then getting an email from them a few weeks later saying, "I did what you told me to do, and I got that $10 million deal." And it feels really good. It feels almost as good as that adrenaline you get when you're in the police department and you do something really good that helps somebody. It's that adrenaline that I get now when I teach somebody these skills and it works for them. And it's amazing.
Yeah, I see it, and I know that the team see it as well. Because we're all supportive in terms of training each other up and helping each other. When you see someone achieving it, it is that satisfaction. So it's that sounds like some initiation there as well, Sandy.
Yes.
So I can imagine. I'm sure they're still bitter about the Chinese meal. So I wanted to get into a few of the techniques, because a lot of the people that listen to this are working in sales. They're on the phones cold calling. They're trying to work and close big deals. They may be in AE. So we're a big fan of going for no, which I know is something that gets talked about a lot. So we say things like, in a cold call, we might list a few problems, and I'd say, "Sandy, you're probably going to tell me that none of those problems exist in your world and everything's perfect." So why do you guys promote going for no rather than yes? What's the science behind it?
I think people feel protected when they can say no. People feel like they're safeguarding themselves by being able to say no. I mean, think about when you were little. What's the first word that most kids learn how to say? No. No. And no matter what you ask your toddler to do, they say no. And they're happy to say no. I think it goes back to that base instinct of, I want to be in control. And people, when they're saying no, they feel like they have more control. Like you're allowing them to have more control because they're allowed to tell you no. Whereas if you're pushing for a yes, people feel that. They feel like they're losing their autonomy. They feel like they're being trapped. They feel like they're forced to make a commitment. And it never goes well. So when you can just kind of let that go, let that pushing for yes go, allow people to say no, you get further with it. And that's, the thing is, when people are pushing for yes, and I don't know if you guys have the yes momentum, I think everyone knows that yes momentum. Hit them with a yes for every weird thing you can think of, and then they'll just keep saying yes when you try to sell them whatever it is you're selling. They're just going to say yes because they've been saying yes for the last 5 questions. So they're just going to say yes again. And I mean, I don't know who came up with that logic, but it doesn't work.
It's baffling.
No, I mean, and when you have a salesperson that is shoving yes down your throat, you feel it. You feel the weirdness. You feel like you're being pushed, and you automatically go on the defensive. But when they allow you to say no, it's a completely different feeling. And I mean, think about the times in your life when you've been pushed for a yes and pushed for a yes, and you reluctantly say yes. When that person comes back around you again and they start pushing you again, you know what's coming. And so you back out, or you won't even deal with them. You won't take the phone call or whatever because you know what's coming. If you allow people to say no and you give them that feeling of autonomy back, they're more likely to talk to you the next time. It goes a lot further in developing a long-term relationship than always pushing for yes and making people feel like they're trapped. Because once you've trapped them once, pushing for that yes, they're not going to be so quick to jump into that next time. They're going to hold back a little bit.
Yeah, I've heard that if you can get somebody to say yes 7 times in a sales call, then it's a guaranteed sale. It's like, who is creating that kind of nonsense? It just doesn't make sense, or just doesn't add up. But people still paddle that stuff. But we're really big fans of the no, and I think it is that safety of you are allowed to say no. And when we have our calls, it's like a yes is good and a no's good. Like that's fine. Like if you want to say either, you can. There's no maybe. A maybe is a no. So it's just have that freedom that I'm a big boy. I'm working in this industry. Don't worry. It's not gonna. You're not gonna hurt my feelings. It's gonna take a lot to do that.
Right.
So in selling and sales, how important is empathy, and what could we be doing to maybe showing more of it?
I think empathy is huge because what you're trying to do is influence when you're using empathy. And we always say this in our classes. What's the difference between manipulation and influence? It's your intent. So if you're intending to manipulate, people can feel that. You know when you're being manipulated. You feel it in your gut. So if you go in trying to influence and get a trust-based influence instead, you're going to go that much further. And empathy is all about the other side. So when you're selling, and it's more about what you need from the seller, like how much money you need, as you're selling, how much money you need, what your goal is. When you're focused on your goals and objectives and the money that you need, it's not about them. When it's about them, you're more focused on what they need or why they need it, which is what empathy is about. People don't understand that when you go in and you talk price automatically, you're bargaining from the start. If you negotiate appropriately, you don't have to bargain because they feel completely heard and understood. And that's what empathy is all about. And when you're trying to sell something to someone, excuse me, when you're trying to sell something to someone, first of all, find out why they may want it, why they may need it, and address that issue. So, make it about them, in other words. When you're selling to them, make it about them and their desires and their needs instead of what you need to sell to them and what you need to get from that sale, because that is a completely different mindset. If you go in focused on the other side, they feel that. And 2 things people want more than anything else in the world is to feel heard and to feel understood. And if you do that for people, the reciprocity that comes from that, which is what really leads you to that sale ultimately, is them wanting to buy from you. And you set that up by using empathy.
Yeah, I think I love that. I've heard it before, but I think you're so right that the difference between manipulation and influence is the intent of it, and it makes so much sense. So, Sandy, I want to move into some of our favourite techniques, which you could probably guess what they're going to be. But it comes down to mirroring and labeling. It was always going to come. I feel like I could probably talk to you about these for a couple of hours, but we're really big on our active listening. So how does the concept of active listening play into the negotiation tactics of mirroring and labeling?
Well, in order to use those skills, you have to be paying attention. And so the problem with some people is they don't pay attention. We have different levels of listening. And so that first level is intermittent listening, kind of getting the gist of what someone is saying and then going back in your own head. That's where a lot of people live. That next level is kind of listening until you hear what you think their problem is, and then you think you can solve it, and then you shut down until they stop talking and you solve their problem. That doesn't get you anywhere either, because you're not hearing everything else that's going on. So if you can at least listen on, what we consider level 3 as to why they want what they want, or why they're feeling what they're feeling, the motivation kind of behind it, that's going to be the best place to be, because then you're not listening for what you need to hear, like what you can do to solve their problem or what you think you understand and then you can move on. You're listening for why it's important to them, what it means to them. Because if you can hit that in any conversation, I'm not talking just for sales, but in any conversation, if you can consciously listen at a level 3 where you just get out of your own head, make your mind a blank slate, listen to what's happening, let it all sink in, and use your gut to go forward, because that's what people don't understand is intuition is huge. And if you just listen on that level 3 and you use your intuition, it's going to take you so much further than anything else that you do. Because I'm sure you've probably heard this too, but your conscious mind, which is where you are in level 1 and level 2, only processes 40 bits of information per second. But your unconscious mind, which is where your intuition lives, processes 20 million bits of information per second. So if you listen on that level 3 and get out of your own head and listen to what they have to say, you're going to feel intuitively in your gut what they need to hear. And I can't tell you how many people that I've coached that have come back and said, I saved their marriage. I feel like, therapy would probably be cheaper, right? But, if it works, it works. Hey, whatever. Therapy session might be a lot cheaper than that. I mean, I'm glad you're coming to me for business negotiations, because I'm just giving you this and it's helping out on the side. That's perfect. But boy, I'm not a therapist. So, but this communication technique is important. You cannot make any of our techniques work unless you're paying attention, unless you're listening. And people think active listening. For some reason, the word active tends to bring up things like they think they should be doing something, because this is the mistake, because they think being passive makes it about the other side. So if you're kind of passive listening, whereas you're just letting them talk, that doesn't do anything for you. The active part of the listening is actually paying attention to what they're saying, taking it in and processing it, and then being able to give it back to them with a good label, a good deep label that can demonstrate your listening and your ability to understand what's going on in their world is huge. Otherwise, you're listening for problem solving, or you're listening for what it means to you when they say it. And that's not going to get you very far. But the listening is key. How can you summarize what someone is saying if you don't listen to what they're saying?
Yeah, and it's like you said, that if you're listening to make it about you, that's especially in sales and business, that's where the commission breath comes out, and it's just you reach and like you're saying, like people's gut and their intuition is just like, no, the fingers are up. I'm not into this. It's so fascinating when you were talking about like the therapy of it, because people say like, I want to get really good at selling, or I want to get really good at cold calling. And it's like, well, these are all skills in a way, but they're all under one umbrella, and that is communication. So really, it's not that you want to get good at sales or selling. You want to be a better communicator, which is, if you can apply that to your marriage or your children, like you were saying earlier, and all these different things. It's like, we always say, like, get into sales, even if you don't do it for forever. It doesn't have to be your lifelong ambition. The skills that you'll learn in terms of the mindset, the tenacity, along with the communication skills, if you get good at it, well, it's something to be proud of. It will enhance every aspect of your life.
Exactly. I don't think I could have put it better myself. I love that, how you just said that. But if you look at it as a communication technique, you're going to get better at it faster. Because if you're and this is some of the mistakes that people make that we teach also, is that they're in sales and they start using these skills for sales, and that's all they use them for. They're missing out, because the people who get the best at using this are using it all the time. We use it on each other in the Black Swan Group all the time. I mean, daily in our interactions with each other, we're using this stuff. And because we know it works, and because it's kind of showing deference to the people that you work with. You treat them like that, they treat you like that. The relationship is better. Our community is a mere community. Let's back that up a second. Our company is great to work in because we actually listen to each other and we feel heard and we feel understood, and everyone has a voice. Everyone can say whatever they need to say. Everybody's ideas are accepted and listened to, and people look at you and say, yeah, right. But it's the truth. And a lot of that is because we have kind of ingrained these skills into our everyday lives, and that's how we talk to each other, and we're better communicators because of it in our lives. And we tell people all the time, use these things for low stakes practice. Talk to the lady at the grocery store. Talk to the barista at the coffee shop. If you can use our skills to do those things and you start using them that way, they will become more natural, and then your communication is just going to go through the roof, and it's going to affect every aspect of your life, not just your sales ability, but your interactions in general with people around you.
And it's brilliant that you said that everybody at Black Swan is using them on a daily basis. So at what point do you turn around to Chris Voss and say, I know what you're doing. I wanted to ask you about this, because it's like, at what point is it like, is there ever a bit like, I know, because Zach does it all the time. He says, I need to ask you a really difficult question. And he'll do a big accusation. I'm like, just get to the point. I know the thing. It's like a magic trick. So at what point do you, is there like a Jedi level where it kind of goes over your head, or how is it dealing with people that are doing the tricks and the psychology tricks that you know about?
Well, and it's funny the way you even ask that question, because how do you deal with people who you know are using these the psycho tricks that you're using? Because our mindset is we don't look at it that way, because we look at it as influence instead of manipulation. So it just comes across as a genuine conversation. There's a funny story, and Brandon may have told you this, but there's a funny story where Chris and Brandon were working at Georgetown, and Keenan is our video guru. He was there and he was videotaping some of the stuff they were doing, and he had this conversation with Chris. Now Chris is the guy, right? Chris is the guy. Keenan's having this conversation with him, and all he's doing is mirroring him, just repeatedly mirroring everything he's saying, and to the point where Brandon and Keenan start cracking up laughing, and Chris hasn't caught the joke yet because they've just been mirroring him this whole time. And that's why I'm saying, if you can do that, and an accusations audit works really well on Chris too, because everybody wants to feel heard and understood, including us at the Black Swan Group. So we know how important that is. So that's what we do for each other. And, it's not, when it's fun is when you have a new person come on, because every time they use a skill, you go, that was a good mirror. Ooh, that was a really good label. And then and what it does is it builds them up. And then before long, they're using them naturally too. And so that's how the company works, right? You come in, you get kind of indoctrinated in, I guess. It's not the right word to use, but you come into the fold, and we all use these skills. And they don't believe that we all use these skills on each other all the time until you actually start working for the group, and then you go, wow, you weren't kidding. Yeah. And we say, no, this is how we communicate, because we know it's effective. We know it works. We know it makes people feel good. So that's why we use it. And skills work on us too. So
yeah, and like you said, it's for the good though. It's for the influence, and it's to make people feel heard. And it's like, well, that's kind of part of the team morale and things. So, Sandy, for anyone that's listening, my issue is, so people always talk about, and when I do sales training, it's like, right, okay, who's heard of mirroring? And they go, yeah, I've heard of mirroring. It's where Sandy sat back in her chair, so I'm going to sit back in my chair. And Sandy started laughing, so I'm going to start laughing with her. Which is like, for me, that is like, yeah, that is mirroring. That's mirroring level 1. That is mirroring on like the basics of what it is. I love when you really get into the crux of it. So could you give us an overview of what you think mirroring and how to kind of keep pushing that to mirror at its finest?
Right. So it's funny because mirroring is probably, next to summary, my favorite skill. you can do so much with a mirror, and people just don't understand it. And the thing is, too, you're either really, really good at mirrors, or you're not really good at mirrors and you have to practice a lot. And so the funny thing here is Chris is amazing with labels and he's amazing with calibrated questions. He's less amazing with mirrors. And so mirrors is like my thing. Mirrors and summary are probably my two favorite skills. But when you mirror, we take body language out of it. Because if you cross your arms and I cross my arms, we're just two people sitting there with our arms crossed. It really doesn't do anything. I mean, it doesn't bond anybody. So mirroring people using a proper inflection and a proper tone of voice is kind of the key with the mirroring. Because if you want people to feel understood, you mirror with a downward inflection. You're like, downward inflection. I get it. Or if you're mirroring because you want to gather information, which is my favorite way to use a mirror, you mirror with an upward inflection. Upward inflection? Like, tell me more. It's a question without asking a question. And so you tend to get a lot more information because you're not using those question buzzwords. Because when you use those question buzzwords, people feel like they're being interrogated, especially if they're what we call an analyst. They hate direct questions. So we avoid that by using that mirror with that upward inflection. Another thing people get confused about, I mean, we don't completely discard body language. We call that affect shifts. If I'm having a conversation with you and you sit back and cross your arms, something just changed. And so my mind registers, all right, what just changed? Let me see if I can label that dynamic or throw a couple mirrors in here to figure out where their head is just gone. And so you're watching the body language, but mirroring the body language literally does nothing for you. Also, mirroring feelings is something that people do that is also a big no-no. Because if you start laughing and I start laughing, we're both sitting here laughing and we both look like crazy people because I don't know why you're laughing. And now you know that I don't know why you're laughing, but I'm laughing. And so then we both kind of look at each other as like, what the hell's happening here? So you don't do that. So like if you get upset and then I mirror your upset feelings by being upset, we just made each other dumber, essentially, because it leans towards common ground, which we have no faith in. Common ground, will it work? Yes, it will work. It'll work in those one-off things when you actually may have something in common with the person you're trying to sell to, but that's not normal. So if you depend on common ground, you're going to fall on your face because that doesn't always work. It's better to use our skills, and if you happen to have something in common, fabulous. But shooting for that common ground by mirroring body language and mirroring feelings is not going to get you anywhere. Instead, you have to think a little bit deeper about it. And the example I like to use, if you're trying to make an appointment with somebody and they say, well, Tuesday's not a good day because, my son plays Little League and his games are always on Tuesday night. So if you come back with, oh, really? My son plays Little League too. Where do you go from there? They're going to go, oh, yeah. Okay. So
cool. You're making it about you.
Yeah. So instead, when they say, yeah, Tuesdays aren't good for me, my son plays Little League, he's there. So instead, come back with something that is about them. Oh, so it looks like you must spend a lot of time at the ball fields. And they go, yeah, we're there 3 or 4 nights a week. And this, you're trying to set up a time to have an appointment with them, right? So it's important to know what days are good or bad. And he just told you Tuesday's bad because of this. Go into that a little bit further. Oh, seems like you spend a lot of time at the ball field.
Yeah.
And let them tell you more. Then you know that not only are Tuesdays bad, but Monday night's practice and Thursday night's practice. So Tuesdays are games. Wednesday and Friday are going to be the better days to do this. They tell you that without telling you that because you made it about them instead of about you.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I love it. I love it as well because so many sales reps panic when it comes to like questioning. So it's like, right, okay, well, I want to find out. I want to get them to a point of an emotion. I want to find out about their future state and the impact of the problems they've got that I can solve. Blah 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 blah. And they're sat there and they're thinking, what question? Like you said, they're worrying about the questions they're gonna ask them. And it's like, well, then, if you're worrying about those questions, you're not actively listening, which defeats the whole point of the phone call. So, why are we doing this dance? So I'm just like, just listen and write your notes. And then when they say, yeah, it's been frustrating because of all the rain on the roof. The rain on the roof.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you're drilling down, they open up a nice label. So, mirroring, I love the examples that you give me there. Could you give us an in-depth into labeling? And I really love mislabeling, and I love opportunities where sometimes I mislabel and I'm like, I don't even know if that was a label or a mislabel or if it was even part of the labeling family, but you throw it in there and you're like, does that work? So it's like playing with it. But could you give us like an overview of how you'd define it and maybe some examples and any anecdotes around it?
So labeling is essentially a verbal observation. You take what you see and you speak it, essentially. And, when you're first starting out, you're going to use, it seems like, it looks like, it feels like, it sounds like, whichever one speaks to you. And what I have found that helps people kind of dive into labels a little bit better is, depending on your learning style, you can lean on one of those labels a little more than the other. So for people who are auditory learners, if they say it sounds like, that speaks to their brain. If they say it looks like, and they're a visual learner, that speaks to their brain. So when people have a hard time coming up with labels or figuring out what to say in a label, take whatever your learning style is and just kind of keep that mantra in your brain as you're listening to someone talk. So for me, it seems like is where I go because I'm a kinesthetic learner. I learn by doing. So I'm always thinking in my head, it seems like, what does it seem like? And that's what I ask myself to figure out what I'm trying to point to on the other side. Because when you're talking with somebody, if you're labeling exactly what they're saying all the time, you're labeling the obvious. You should be using your labels to figure out what they're not saying. So whatever they're talking about, there are things that are not being said. And so what you're thinking about is, it seems like this, it seems like that. Whatever they're saying, it seems like, it's going to come to you. And you're going to point out exactly what they're not saying. And that's going to take you a little bit further, because in every conversation where you're trying to use labels, think of them as standing on an X, and you're trying to move them as far off that X as you can. So instead of constantly talking about the X, whatever they're implying and everything else they're saying, label that instead, and it's going to take you a lot further off the X. And you're going to find out things about people that they wouldn't normally just come out and tell you, because you're being curious about them on the other side, instead of just constantly labeling the one thing that they're talking about. We do an exercise in the trainings that we do. We call it the passions exercise. And so we set people up and we say, okay, you're allowed to ask 2 questions. You're allowed to ask, what are you passionate about? And then what about that makes you passionate? And then you're not allowed to ask anything else. Everything else has to be labels or mirrors. And try to see how far off the X you can push the person. Now, this is a little bit simpler than, trying to make a huge sale, but it's a great way to help practice. So if you ask me what I'm passionate about and I say, well, I'm passionate about hiking, you can say, what about hiking makes you passionate? And I can say, well, I'm in the outdoors. It's a great way to work off a little stress. And, I enjoy having my family come with me, and it's good exercise. So what would you label from that? Seems like what?
Yeah. So what's my intention to push you off the X as far as possible?
Yeah.
It seems like
I basically said 4 things to you. I like being outside. I like the exercise. Gets me away from stress, and I can have my family with me. Those are 4 points I just made. So which one of those do you want to hear more about? That's what you label. So depending on the situation, you can say, oh, so it seems like you like doing family hikes. And I'll say, yeah, the family goes with me. We talk with the kids. We get to know what's going on in their lives. Or you could have said, okay, so it seems like hiking is a big stress relief for you. Yeah, it's a big stress relief. Work is kind of hard. And so it depends on where you want me to go is what you label. Because well, no matter what I said, it all came out of my mouth. So it's not going to be like you're labeling something that's going to send me in a direction I didn't want to go in, because I said those things. So wherever you want to know more about, that's what you label.
And next thing you know, we talk. Yeah, and then you open up about the stress, the job. Yep. You might be leaving your husband. All these different things that come into it, and it's from height. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. It's from
labeling the hidden, essentially.
Yeah, I'm gonna use that with my team tomorrow morning when they come in at 9 o'clock. before I get them on the phone, get them all labeling. I love it, Sandy. I could talk to you all day because it's like that. This is the thing that we teach and we practice and we do on a daily basis in terms of our work and our office. So it's a pleasure. I guess I'll hit you with one last fluffy question before we leave, because it wouldn't be a podcast without a fluffy question.
Okay.
So say somebody's, we usually do it to the start of their career, but I think say somebody came to you and said, I want to be like a better negotiator, but you can only give them one piece of advice. What would that one piece of advice be, Sandy?
Ooh, that's so hard. For me, I think it's listening level, because you can practice the skills all day long, but if you're not a good listener, they're going to be harder for you. So listening at a higher level is step number one. Learning how to get out of your own head and focus on the other side in your listening is the first major step that a lot of people have to make, because it's at least 2/3 of the population are horrible at listening. So if you practice that and listening from someone else's perspective instead of your own, that's going to change your life in and of itself, because you're now listening for their benefit instead of yours. So
do you think we're worse at listening because of the world that we're living in right now? I guess social media distractions, or do you think we've always, as human beings, been bad listeners?
I think that this digital age hasn't helped, because texting, emails, posting things on social media, we don't talk as much anymore. And it's hard to get to know someone really well if you're only texting back and forth, because tone of voice is huge, and you can tell a lot about a person by their tone of voice. So if you're actually listening to them and you're listening for that tone and little nuances in that tone of voice, that's going to give you something more than what you can read in a text message, because you can't control the tone there. So the tone basically on a text message or on an email is placed based on the person who's reading it, not the person who's sending it, because the person who's sending it has no control. So if you do voice to voice, it's much better. And because people don't do that as often now, they don't listen as well, because they expect whatever they get in that text or that email to be the most important thing, and a lot of times it's not.
Yeah, we always say, like, when you start typing out an email, I'll be chatting with Zach and I'll be like, what am I doing? Just call the person. It's just always, never ever send an email, get them on a call. It's always so much easier.
Well, the sad thing there is people say, well, I have clients that just won't call me on the phone. Well, okay, so what you do is when they send you an email and they ask you 10 different questions, you answer one and you send back. And then they say, oh, they only answered one question. So they send another email. You answer one question, send it back. Eventually, they're going to realize this is a pain in the butt. It's taking 3 days. That I could have had a phone conversation for 5 minutes, and this would be done.
Yeah.
And and we say use our skills to push people to a voice to voice, because you can't influence without being on a voice to, well, you can, but you don't know how it's going to land because you have no control over tone. Whereas if you're voice to voice, you can control tone, and when you control tone, it makes a huge difference in everything you're doing.
Exactly, totally, and I think the tone's so important. And people say to us, like, well, what are the best ways to prospect? Is it a cold call, LinkedIn, email? People are always on their phones now. They might not necessarily pick up an unknown number. It's like, yes, but if you send a message, like you said there, Sandy, people are reading it with their tone, and you're not in charge of that. So
right.
we're big promoters of cold calling. Sandy, an incredible chat. I feel motivated, inspired, and I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to label and mirror everybody that gets in my way. If people want to check you out or the Black Swan Group, where can they find you?
Wow, it seems like we're all over the place right now. Let's see. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We have a negotiating group on Facebook. We're on YouTube. I don't think people realize the amount of information they can find on YouTube from us. If you just put the Black Swan Group into YouTube, you'll find our page, all our faces pop up at the top. And there are videos. Excuse me, hold on. Let's try that again. All right. There are videos on YouTube that talk about every single one of our skills. and it's from all of us, because I may speak to you, but Troy, one of our other instructors, may speak more to someone else, because we all kind of talk in our own voices, and we all say things a little bit differently. So, people hear them a little bit differently. So if you go on YouTube, I mean, it's free, and you can hear all the little videos that we have that give you advice, and you take what works for you. Also, the website is huge, and our blog called The Edge. Every week, every Tuesday, a new blog post comes out, and they're packed full of advices, and they're always from one of us. One of the instructors is doing a different blog every week, so you get to hear it from a different perspective, and you can actually search on the website under blogs, and it'll pull up whatever you want to know more about, and it'll pull up a blog for you that's about that subject. So our website is huge for that.
Yeah, well worth, for anyone listening, well worth checking out. I was watching some of the videos that you've done this morning, and they've had thousands of views, and they're incredible. So make sure you do check these guys out, and Sandy's good work. Sandy, thank you once again for joining us on the We Have a Meeting podcast. It's been incredible.
It was great meeting you. I'm sorry I missed Zach. Did he chicken out? Was he afraid?